I can't just be a work for hire guy. I want to do my own thing. I need to have my own book. I need to have something with a barcode on it. I self-published Almighty in 2008 because I couldn't get anyone to publish it. I couldn't get anyone who was interested in even saying no. I'm first generation born from an immigrant family, and the idea of becoming like a professional artist was just like radical. I never considered that to be a possibility.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Process podcast, where we explore the art of storytelling. I'm Lance Laspina, and as always, I'm joined by my intrepid co-host, Mr. Shane Patrick White.
Hello.
Today, as always, we have a very special guest for you. He's an artist, he's a writer, he's everything in between. His name is Ed Laroche. Ed, for those who may not know that much about you, could you please take a moment to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for a living?
Originally started my professional career in animation, working at Sony Pictures Animation, working on Extreme Ghostbusters, doing storyboard revisions for animation. Self-taught artist. I've always been doing like my own comics and my own storytelling from a very early age. And at some point, I ran into some people that told me I could actually make a living doing it. So I had to basically throw away all of my self-taught education and learn the basics and reapply myself. And over the course of a couple of years, I was able to finally get into the professional art world. I did animation for about, and I still do animation, but I did that for roughly about 12 years, and finally decided that I wanted to do what I've always kind of been doing, which is be kind of like a writer director, but on the page. I wanted to emulate my inspirations. Like in particular John Carpenter, and the best way to do that was to get into storyboarding for live action. And took some effort and some time, and eventually, I started doing commercials, and eventually into television. And I want to say that I'm basically, I wouldn't call myself a seasoned film guy on paper, but I would say that I'm in that space now. Heavily, but I go back and forth. I do animation, I do my own graphic novels and comic books, because I'm a huge believer in doing IP. And I guess my goal is to just be an all-around artist, to be able to get paid in a lot of different ways, applying what I know.
Okay. So is it fair to say that you were first introduced to art by your cousin whom you used to visit? He kind of got you into the comic book world and got you started drawing your own comics. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I'm an only child, so my mother would send me up to New York to hang out with my extended family. In particular, this one family where my older cousin was into comic books, and that's where I got into comic books, reading comic books, and just getting an education on comic books, because he impressed upon me the importance of not only the importance of good storytelling, but also knowing who the artists were. They weren't just, comic books weren't just, manufactured and plucked from some kind of comic book tree. He was like, look, you got to know these, this person's style. You have to be able to identify this artist based on their style and not look at the credits, And I think maybe there, the education was kind of put upon me to basically, know what I was looking at.
Okay. What era would that have been in?
It's interesting. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shane.
I don't know, because there's several eras, and and people, for instance, and this is no knock on people who were influenced in the 90s, but the 90s had a really extreme quality to them, and not
Mm-hmm.
probably the best education in terms of storytelling. So that's why I'm asking it.
Well, it's funny. I like what you did there.
I was trying to be kind.
Yeah,
I was trying to be kind.
I want to say there was some overlap. Mid '60s, late '60s, '70s into the '80s. I'm not entirely sure what age that is.
So it
Mm-hmm.
60s is silver, 70s is bronze, and then 80s is copper, apparently, and then after that it's extreme. I guess I don't know. It's it just gets crazy, but they call it modern after that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think I was kind of informed by probably some of the same people that you guys were
Mm-hmm.
inspired by,
Mm-hmm.
Perez. I mean, well, let's go take a step back, Neil Adams, um, Gene Colan, Byrne, Perez,
Mm-hmm.
and later on, Sienkiewicz and
Yep.
nice. Wow.
all
Yep.
of
Yeah.
the great guys. I mean, you go back to Gil Kane and Romita and what Romita was doing. His father,
Right.
John Romita.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of overlap because what was going on in Spider-Man, with the whole death of Glenn Stacy and just that whole era of art, what was being established, Neil Adams on Batman,
Oh yeah.
Batman.
Yeah, that was a good era.
That was just like that was like a watershed moment in comic books.
Now, I don't want to give away your age, Ed, but approximately how old were you during this time? Because I'm just curious, like if it really aligns with my same experience.
No, I'm proud of my age. I'm 54.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm 53, so we're practically the same age. So,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
yeah,
same here.
Yep.
Oh, neat.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're all old guys.
Yeah, I get all guys. But so how old were you when I'm just curious because when I was young, I have my mother to thank for getting me into art. She always made sure that I had, paper and pencil available, and she always encouraged me to draw starting from as a young kid. And I'm just curious if it was your cousin who first influenced you, like had you not drawn at all prior to that, and then all of a sudden you got into doing art, or how's the story go?
It's kind of hazy when I think about it, but ultimately, my cousin was an artist along with a friend of his, gentleman named Eric Eaton, and they were doing their own books. And so I would go there for the summers, and since I would come back to basically, you know, just my own little universe, you know what? Let me take a step back because prior to that whole era, I'm not entirely sure how prevalent this part of being a young kid was. I mean, I suspect, there were kids playing with their GI Joes and coming up with like campaigns and stories and stuff like that. But it really feels like Star Wars was kind of like this, this
Watershed moment.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
so we would play with these Star Wars action figures, and then later on Micronauts, and all of these different. It felt like it ushered in this whole new action figure era. And I feel like that started the building blocks alongside with my cousin and his friend making their own comic books.
And at that time, did you think like I could actually do this and make a living doing it,
No,
or was that too early? Okay, that was too
no,
early at the
that
time.
that came when I was in my 30s.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah, I just did art primarily originally because I wanted to impress my cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Like every year I would go back and I would improve a little bit. Um, and then at some point it became kind of like a coping mechanism for being an only kid and not really being allowed to go out so much, and getting kind of lost in this comic book world universe. Um, and I just continued doing it because it kind of became a part of my identity. Um, at some point, I was I was wished away into this Christian military school, and they took
Oh yeah.
away all of my comic books, and they told me that
Oh
everything that
no.
I was doing was a sin. This was around the time when Dungeons and Dragons was huge,
Oh
Hmm.
God, yeah.
Yeah.
Remember this?
and it was like
Yeah.
a satanic type of endeavor, you know.
Oh
Uh,
gosh.
but by that time, story and fantasy was already kind of ingrained in my whole being. So I went
Hmm.
from Marvel, DC, comic books, and stuff like that straight into Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, you know,
Hmm.
and
Oh
just
wow. Yeah.
novelization of fantasy and stuff like that.
And then at some point you self-publish Almighty. And that what year was that? Because like I'm looking, I read Almighty and I read the first trade paperback of The Warning, and it seems like there was a good chunk of years between those two projects.
Well, okay, so around 1993, 94, there was a comic book store that I frequented in Glendale, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with my life because comic books and drawing, that was just, I never considered that to be a possibility. I never considered being an artist because, you know, I'm first generation born from an immigrant family, and the idea of becoming like a professional artist was just like radical, you know. You know,
Yeah,
we didn't immigrate from, you know, this third world country for you to try to become an artist, you know.
to be indulgent and not to be a lawyer or a doctor or
Yeah, well,
some other
I mean,
pressure.
their aspirations were a little bit more tempered. They were like, be a dental tech, you know, be an
Right.
X-ray tech, you know, do something with computers, you know. But those things didn't really hold any interest for me. And I was going to this comic book store, and I ran. The comic book store owner introduced me to Steve Siegel, who later on formed Man of Action, along with Joe Kelly, Joe Casey, and Duncan Rouleau. But he was living in Burbank, and Sean McManus was in the neighborhood. By that time, McManus had done work on Swamp Thing on the seminal Alan Moore run.
Nice.
And so I was around people and people who were making a living doing art. And I was that was the cusp of the image explosion where people were making residual six-figure residual check
Yeah, absurd
on top of a
money.
pretty crazy page rate, you know?
Right, like $1,000 a page for
Yeah,
breakdowns, and yeah, yeah. You hear the stories, and it's like, oh my god, the young kids becoming really wealthy really fast. I'm like, that's a recipe for disaster.
absolutely. And I think,
But also innovation too, which was it really woke people up. I think.
well, especially when you think about what they did for color, comic book
Yeah.
coloring. I guess you could say that Malibu Comics kind of ushered that in.
Oh yeah.
I think they were
Yep.
the one
For
of the
sure.
first ones that did computer coloring.
Yeah, that's why Marvel bought them out, I think, and then closed everything down. So
I self-published Almighty in 2008 because I couldn't get anyone to publish it. You know, I couldn't get anyone to who was interested in even saying no to me. You know, so I, you know, gathered enough money to publish it on my own, and it opened up a whole new world of opportunity for me in the movie world. You know, I was able to get a um, shopping agreement out of it, and I was in. You know, I met a lot of people. WME had a lot of great, interesting general meetings. Um, uh, got to deal with Philip Noyce, who did Salt and Dead Calm, and that's where I met Ken Nolan, who wrote Black Hawk Down. So I got into the movie world, you know, by doing it on my own and publishing it on my own. And fast forward something like last year, from 2008 to last year, where I had done my first book, my first published book through Image Comic Books, which was called A Warning. And I think that came out in 2015 or something like that. It was a 10 issue uh, series, and you only read the first 5 issues, Shane. There's
Yeah,
five additional. There's like almost like 80 more pages after that.
yeah. I'm
Um,
excited to finish it.
yeah, and I was just sort of sitting there, and I was working on my next book, which was a reimagining of another self-published book that came out like in 2010 called Waveform. So COVID hits, the shutdown hits, and I'm working on this thing. And I'm just sort of sitting there and I'm thinking, I don't know how relevant this is. I don't know what kind of world we're going to be emerging into. I don't know if this is really the zeitgeist that I'm tapping into here, you know? So I was like, you know what? What I'll do is I'll dust off the first book. You know, no one wants to print, or hardly anyone wants to really print black and white books. So I had to go back, break it apart, redraw some stuff, open it up for color, and I was able to convince Image to print out Almighty, and I finished doing that last year. And you know, my whole thing right now is, along with work made for hire to keep the lights on and keep me knee deep in Honey Nut Cheerios. I'm, you know, I'm actively, you know, thinking about, you know, IP and like survival, you know, and
Mhm.
being able to monetize my creativity beyond my ability, you know, to execute, you know, because we're all getting up to that age where you're starting to bump up against the new fresh people coming up behind you who are amazing people, you know, because we've we've created this the ability to make a living,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, but now you're bumping up with your ability to operate at a very high level, and these new fresh eyes and fresh wrists coming up
Mhm.
uh, behind
And they're
you,
hungry.
and
Yeah,
they're
they're hungry
hungry.
too.
So what's interesting about your work is that, like I said, you really were seemed influenced and aware of all these types of comics, and yet there's a it seems like there's more of a direct shift or way that you approach your comics that is more storyboard based, more filmic, more cinematic. And I'd heard in a few interviews that you were more interested in focusing the audience on the art and the story going on, as opposed to page design and layout. And how did you come to that? You know, knowing that you had all these greats before you, and where the future of comics is going. Like, how did you land there?
Well, let me take a step back to just answer the question prior to this, which is like, um, from the ashes of the implosion of the speculator market in comic books, I went into animation, you know, and
Oh, right.
it's in animation that I really learned how to draw, you know. Um, you were around people that went to art school, you know. They were influenced by other things beyond comic books, um, and I got sort of pushed into the storyboard department, right, by doing revisions. And eventually, you know, what they want to do in animation is they want to start you out doing revisions so you can learn uh like why things work the way that they work, you know, like screen direction and maintaining the 180, and constant screen direction. Like if your character comes in, you know, left to right, you know, in the next page, he's probably still going, or she's probably still going left to right, you know, and there's a reason for that because the bad guy's going
Right.
right to left, you know. And they eventually want to train you up so you can become a storyboard artist. And what you learn in storyboarding is, if you're just reading the script and just conveying what's in the script, it's not good enough. You know, a lot of these directors are like, okay, that's great that you did exactly what's in the script, but you have to sort of like make it more, you know, extrapolate. You can't change the dialogue, but you can do different things within what is being asked that kind of, you know, plusses out the scene, you know.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I resisted that for a long time. Um, and then eventually I was just like, oh, well, this actually is connected to what I've always been doing, which is making my own stories, you know. So
Uh,
and also my inspiration in John Carpenter and directing and stuff like that. And then I just made that connection. I was like, well, wait a second. I'm basically directing on the page, you know. And
exactly.
after a long time working in animation, I was just looking around and I was just like, man, these schedules are brutal. You know, it's just like, you know, uh, there was like this weird macho thing about like, oh yeah, I didn't even go home last night. You know, I just stayed.
Oh yeah,
I've been here for 3 days. You know, and they're like, oh
Mhm.
wow, you know,
Wow. Yeah.
you
Yep.
know, and then
Yeah,
you
that
get
happens everywhere.
yeah, and then they lay you off
Yeah.
for 3 months. You're like, oh,
Hmm.
okay, all that work.
yeah,
You know, I was working towards a layoff. You
Yeah.
know, so I started seeing that if I was going to have to, if I'm going to be like a professional artist, um, then I can't just be a work for hire guy. You know, um, I just started getting frustrated because I started working on stuff where I was like, this is a dumb idea. You know, and I feel like I'm giving good ideas to dumb work, not dumb work, but a dumb idea. You know, good work to dumb ideas. And I was just like, you know, frustrated. You know, I was like, I want to do my own thing. You know, and at one point, I was like, I need to have my own book. You know, like I need to have something with a barcode on it. You know,
nice.
you know
Yeah,
that is a representation of what I can do. And you know, also here's an admission. You know, I'm not the best artist in the world. You know, I'm not a wonderkin or anything like that. You know, I mean, you know, what I can do and where my strengths lie is in how the story is told, as opposed to the most beautiful pose I can get a character into, and that's where the design of the page gets. That's where out of image, that's what it was about, was like this third market of selling your original artwork, and that you could make a lot of money having a page of Captain America or the X-Men or Wolverine, and they were aiming for that, but it was at the cost of the story and what was happening in those stories.
absolutely. Yeah,
So when I started to do my own thing, I grappled with that. I redrew the first pages at least 8 or 9 times, doing page design that was reminiscent of the time. And I was just like, this is not my strength. My storytelling is my strength. Holding on an image and then cutting at the right way, at the right time, and timing and all that stuff.
yeah, yeah.
That's where I was at.
So, Ed, I'm sure there are a lot of people watching this that are still looking at their first job in either animation, storyboards, that sort of thing. So, I'm always curious to know and hear about the story of your first job. You talked about you went into as a storyboard revisionist, and I'm curious, what did you have to present to them to get the job? Like, how did that work? Did you reply to a posting on like in the trades or something like that, or did you know
No,
someone? Work.
I've never got a job where I didn't know somebody that put my portfolio in front of the right person. I would say the most important, um, to someone who's starting out, you have to be able to be honest with your abilities, because then you can say, okay, this is my favorite artist, and I'm right here. Um, and every day I get a little bit closer to that level of skill. Okay. At some point over the course of time, I don't know, maybe you get it close enough to get work, right? And in that time, you start talking to people and building relationships, hopefully, you know, because your relationships are almost as important as your ability to do the job. Um, your, whether people can work with you is probably almost as important as your ability to do the job and having the relationships to know that the job even exists. Because a lot of these jobs, especially nowadays, you don't know. Something is in production, something is in development. It hasn't hit the trades, you know, and there's no way to talk to the person that would make that decision to get you onto the gig, you know. So being able to do the gig is just one of the legs on the table that are required to have a professional career. And you can't take any one of those legs off and have a stable uh, career. You can't be a weirdo. You can't
Yeah, you
um,
can't be difficult to work with in general. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, because then people don't want to work with you. And it
exactly.
doesn't
Yeah.
matter how
Doesn't
good
matter how
you
good you are.
are.
Yeah,
Exactly, exactly.
yeah,
In fact,
yeah.
if you could just do the job and be a
Hmm.
delight, people want you in the room,
Mm.
that'll get you further than being a genius and being difficult.
Specifically with your job, how did that go? How did you present your work to someone? And did you already have a portfolio built up at that point?
Yeah, because I had done, because by that time I had been trying to get into the image comic universe.
Hmm.
And so trying to get into image in the 90s, having to learn how to draw at a professional level. That was me getting my portfolio together for Comic Con, going to stand in line in Comic Con, portfolios, um, talking to
Oh, I
people.
remember those well. I
Yep.
was I was always miserable.
I was just, it could be brutal, right?
Oh
Oh yeah,
my
you're
God.
waiting for hours just to have an editor say, "Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
you could do better. Work on your anatomy," because they're
Mm.
looking
If
they're
they're
looking for
kind, sure.
yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Some guys, at the beginning, you got like writers and artists in those lines. And then towards the end, they were just like sending PAs. It was just a waste of time.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
was terrible. But
And you were working traditionally at this time in brush and or ink or pen and ink, or
uh,
like what
quote
was your tool?
quills, pencils. It became this fetish. What was Travis using? To do those
Oh yeah,
lines. What was
Yeah.
Travis Tress.
It's going to
yeah.
magically transform you into be able to do his work, right?
Yeah, it's like yeah, look at those lips. How did you get those
Yeah.
lips? What
Yeah.
kind of
If I only
template
had the
are you
right
using?
tools, I could do the same thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it always
Yeah.
goes back to
Mm.
what brush are you using?
Right. What paper?
What paper?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of elements and aspects to becoming an artist, but one of those things that I don't think people really understand or gets talked about is the physical aspect of how you are able to lay a line down, and going through the whole image era, like for instance, you don't draw a line towards you. If you're inking, you go away from you, right? And being able to get a straight line, like if you can get a straight line like here, then you're golden, because then you can extend that, and how you hold the brush or the quote quill or the pen, you have to build all that stuff up. It's not just like what you know about anatomy. It's like you're dealing with like a very precise movement and instrument and confidence, and being able to do a confident line as opposed to a person sort of like, you know, you could look at work and say, okay, this person just laid it down, you know.
Right.
and then another
Right.
person was just
Right.
struggling. They were holding on, and they were just trying
Sure.
to, dig into
Yeah.
that piece.
So Ed, I'm curious to know how you first learned about storyboarding. For example, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a comic book artist. And then I discovered filmmaking and started doing that in high school and ended up going to film school. And it was in film school that is where I discovered what storyboarding was. And I thought it was a perfect marriage between comic books and filmmaking, where I could still be kind of directing on paper, so to speak. So I'm always interested to know when an artist gets into storyboarding, how did they find out about it? How did you discover it? And what did you think about that process?
I got to be completely honest. I resisted going into storyboarding for the longest time because none of those guys seemed to be very happy. Um, man,
You're specifically the animation
in
track. Is
animation
that
in
okay?
particular.
Okay.
Yeah.
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 I mean, there's just a lot of, effort,
Alcoholics.
you know, and it's
Well,
hard
there's
to
a
do.
lot of drawing.
It's
So
a lot of drawing,
yeah.
and it's hard to do when the sun is shining outside and you're just sort of
Mhm.
like at home or at the
Mhm.
job. You can't
Yeah.
go out on your weekends. You can't go home. You can't go home. That was just a lot of work because, that this is the thing about animation. You got to have a start pose, middle pose, and an end pose.
Mhm.
You got to be able to establish where everyone is at, and you have to be able to track where everyone is at, right? And then, because design is always lagging when it comes to boards, sometimes you have to sort of extrapolate the background. You only get one
Mm.
angle, and then you have to sort of design the background from there. And then retroactively, the background people would take your designs and, or maybe not, but they would work with what you've established as far as like what's going on on the board. Um, so all of these things I hated doing because they were really challenging and they pushed you. And, not everyone is a superhero. There's a normal guy walking down the street, or a normal woman walking down the street. You got to draw dogs. You got to draw cars. You got to do a lot of stuff that if you're kind of left on your own devices, you're not drawing, because it's not Wolverine, it's not Batman, you know.
Oh, and on top of that, it's in the style of the show too, right?
Exactly. It was super important to stay on model. Um, that was like one of the hardest things. And it's so funny because when I look at boards now, like they did a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles show, I want to say like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that was being done at Nickelodeon. I mean, that was just like roughs, that they were able to send overseas. All the information was there, camera movements, all the blocking and all that stuff was there, but they were roughs. It would never pass the test that we were sort of dealing with back when I was like heavily, heavily into animation. Um, and I always, I was like, look, why is it up? Because they were using our boards for layouts overseas. They were trying to, you know, cut some of the fat, not have a layout person over there, to put stuff on model, so they were using boards to basically, flesh out the rest of the story, and it made everything, just made everything harder on our end, and I guess maybe what they were thinking was that we would have more control over the overall look of the show. But when you see what they were able to do with Nickelodeon by just, concentrating on the cool factor and the camera movement and the forced perspective and stuff like that, I mean, that stuff is just fantastic. But you look at the board and you're like, I would never been able to get away with this stuff at all.
So we're all of the age where we had to make that transition from traditional materials to digital. I'm just curious when that happened for you, and did you fight it? Because a lot of artists, traditional artists, fought that process to their own detriment. Shane raising his hand, and I'm just curious: did you adopt it right away, or did you go fighting and screaming?
I fought it, but part of it was because it was very expensive to make that
Mhm.
transition. Uh, com- Compared to now. nowadays, like I have one of the top bleeding edge cintiques, perfect size, light. I can travel with it, and it only cost me $800. You know, Back in the day, a cintiq around that same size was $1,500.
Hmm. Yep.
More.
Yep.
And it was huge. It was heavy. It was bulky. You could crack coconuts with it. So there was that, and then there was the other thing, we were talking about earlier, which is you were physically uh, used to paper and
Hmm.
pencil and whiteout and post-its and the photocopier and cutting and pasting and then to make that transition into like a really slick surface using a stylus, it was tough to do. It was really
Well,
tough.
even I was going to say, even before Cintiq, they just had the tablets. And
Yeah,
then there was always that disconnect between your hand drawing and what you're looking at on the screen, which was always really difficult for me. Eventually, I got the hang of it after months and months and months of practice. But gosh, I couldn't wait to switch to a Cintiq whenever I could afford one.
yeah. I would say that I fully adopted digital when I could do that. Actually, yeah,
Okay. So you didn't start working with a tablet
I
prior to
did,
the Cintiq.
but
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't like it. I didn't find it to
Mm-hmm.
be like my preferred way of working. Now I prefer digital. I mean, there's always an analog um, part of the process. I like to go to the coffee shop and sit down and just sort of sketch and just sort of like, you know, improv on the page. And,
Mm-hmm.
my sketches are always different than the digital stuff. So there's always going to be this analog aspect to the work, like I lay out stuff, but you I lay out stuff digitally now, but prior to that, I would lay it out pencil and paper and then scan them in and then go over that digitally,
Mm-hmm.
but
Sure.
now ever since I got into ever since I started working with SketchBook Pro, it's like my favorite drawing uh, program. I mean, I know a lot of guys are doing Procreate,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I tried Procreate on my iPad, um, but there was nothing as intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there are things you can do in Procreate that you can't do in Sketchbook Pro. There's a little bit of a Photoshop overlap.
And yeah, and there's vice versa though. I'm a big Storyboard Pro, or not Story. I'm sorry, Sketchbook Pro rather,
Sketchbook Pro, yeah.
proponent as well, because mostly of the tools, like the ruler tool,
Yeah,
the ellipse tool. I think some of those tools can't be like. I tried Clip Studio. I like Clip Studio to a certain extent, but it really falls short in that aspect. And same thing with Procreate. Procreate, to draw a line, you have to hold it and pause to draw a straight line for it to snap. And then same
yeah.
thing with circles, but you can never get exactly what you want. With Sketchbook Pro, you can see exactly what it's going to look like prior to doing it with pressure and everything. So yeah, I'm right there with you.
And then the program that you kind of slipped into also, Storyboard Pro. I resisted that program. I mean, when
Yeah.
Toon Boom first came out, we were just like, "Oh, are you kidding me?" Now on top of doing boards, I have to do timing as well. I have to time out my scenes and and when Toon Boom was first coming out, there were a lot of crashes, so you could work all day and then it would crash and you would lose
Mm,
everything.
Oh,
God.
dear
Oh.
Lord.
Um,
God.
Mm,
so there was like a 3-year period where they finally dialed it in, and then I started using it again, and I had to have a friend of mine give me kind of a crash course on how to use it. Very frustrating experience, but
mm-hmm.
like one of the great things about being a professional artist is they allow you to learn on the job, um, and I was able to sort of like get used to Storyboard Pro. And now I kick myself in the ass when I think about like I should have bought Storyboard Pro with
Mm,
my last gig because it's
mhm.
so the things that you can do with it. Um, I see the value in that program, and I'll get it eventually. But again, it's like, 1,500 bucks.
Yeah, it's
Not
hard for
cheap.
artists just starting out for sure. Hey gang, it's Lance here. Thanks so much for tuning into our YouTube channel today. Shane and I are just getting started with these series of interviews. We could really use your support in help getting the word out to everyone. So if you're enjoying what you're watching so far, please consider subscribing to the channel. In addition, it would be great if you could like the video and share it with a friend. Thanks once again for watching, and enjoy the rest of the video. Ed, being that the name of the show is Beyond the Process, we do like to talk process here. So, is it safe to say that you currently use SketchBook Pro to do your storyboard work?
I use that and Affinity Photo.
Oh, okay.
I
Yep.
highly recommend Affinity Photo.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't want to do Photoshop, the Adobe Suite subscription. So Affinity Photo is a great Photoshop replacement that doesn't require all of the Affinity stuff is not subscription based. And you just have to get used to how things are laid out in Affinity Photo. But as far as I can tell, everything I can do in Photoshop or everything I need to do in Photoshop, I can do in Affinity Photo. And I can draw in Affinity Photo in a way that I can't draw in Photoshop because Photoshop is not really a drawing uh, tool,
Mm-hmm.
not really. I mean, people do
Yeah.
it, but
Yeah.
it's not a drawing tool like Sketchbook.
Right. It wasn't designed. Yeah, it's more of a photo manipulation tool. That's why the word photo is in the name.
Exactly.
No, I agree. I started off drawing in Photoshop, but then once I discovered Sketchbook Pro and realized this was made for people like me for drawing purposes only, and it doesn't have all the fluff that you don't need in a drawing application, that's what I switched to. But there are a ton of I think mostly concept artists. I think they like the paint engine in Photoshop. But for just sketching for me, Shane, I think you use it though, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the brush engine in Photoshop is pretty superior. I've been able to import all my brushes into Clip Studio.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm considering, really leaning more heavily on Clip Studio because as it stands, when we were talking about rulers and circle templates, there is plugins for Photoshop that you can use, like
Oh,
Lazy Nezumi is a
good to
pretty good
know.
one.
Okay.
It's a relatively inexpensive. It's like $30, and the
Mm-hmm.
guy who works on it is fantastic. Um, but yeah, I think a lot of users ended up reshaping Photoshop and its usage. So I think
Mm-hmm.
over time, um, I've been bouncing between Sketchbook Pro for quick ideation, Clip Studio for comics and fine inking, and then Photoshop for all my concept and even storyboard work. I'm still stuck in Photoshop for doing storyboard work for some reason. I got to make that switch.
Yeah.
So,
What percentage of
Oh,
Photoshop would you say that you're actively using?
not as much as it's outgrown me in a lot of ways. It's I know there's a whole animation timeline that I don't use, but I only use it for painting, and I do use Procreate. And I'm starting to use PaintStorm, which is fantastic. It's just that it doesn't work at a higher resolution yet. And
Oh,
I don't know if it ever will be, but it's fantastic. It works the way that I work. Going back to what you were saying about traditional materials, it's everything lacks the tactile experience, but when the brush does what you want it to do, or has the way you want to say uh, built into it, that to me is what's been hard to find for a long time.
hmm.
I want to get back to your initial setup, your how you set up your software to work best for you. For example, like your layers. Do you have a certain process that you use when you're storyboarding to set up your layers? Like, do you have a template or anything that you just start off with, or do you just start on a blank page?
I just, I lay it out. Like I was working on Echo last year, and I've got a page of like, I don't know, 6 or 8, 1.69s,
Mm-hmm.
couple rows, and, you know, I'll just start, I'll read the script, and I'll just start working on it. Um, and then, it's easier to, if I see a chunk of it, then I can drop stuff or I can add stuff, and then I take that and then I blow it up and then start dropping in individual frames. It depends what the client wants. Sometimes they want individual frames. Sometimes they're okay with multiple frames on one page.
Sure.
You got to kind of establish
Mm-hmm.
that at the beginning. Um,
Now, do you set up your layers like not to lead you, but this is the way I do it. I have a foreground layer, I have a background layer, and then I have a sketch layer. And my sketch layer is usually set at like 20% opacity. So I can roughly sketch something out, and then I use the foreground layer to go back over. But if it's usually I reserve foregrounds for characters, and then background is usually anything besides the characters. Obviously, buildings, cars. It could be even background people, that sort of thing. So I have a separate layer. So if the client comes back to you and says, change this, change the angle or change the perspective or the size of the person, it's much easier than trying to use the lasso tool and carve it out.
okay, so you're saying 20% on background and foreground. This is good shit. This is good stuff, man. I wish I was that efficient in the way that I'm doing things. That is good stuff. Most of the times, you know, unless you've really screwed the pooch, or if the script is completely changed,
Yeah.
it's just like, okay, next, let's move on, let's keep it, let's keep this whole ball
Okay,
rolling.
I should have clarified. I switched over to live action now, and obviously in animation, you'd never have time to do all that.
I mean, it depends. Live action, you don't, I mean, sometimes, um, a lot of the times they just want the idea, they want, you know, but rarely do I get like, okay, can we bring the camera down, to where we're like this, rarely do I get that kind of, direction or no, kind of no, changes, a lot of the stuff nowadays is basically like pre-production, kind of like, okay, this is our location. These are our characters. This is kind of like the story and what's going on. What do you think? And then I do a first pass. I'm like, okay, well, you can do this and that. And then you'll get, okay, this character is not in that chair, can we switch that, and that's where, your process would be a lot, that would save me a lot of time. I need to do that more often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, I think it depends on the purpose of the boards. Like shooting boards for film, probably don't need to do that. Advertising boards, if they're pitching them and they're
Yeah.
very detailed, I would definitely be more inclined to do it that way, breaking up the foreground background.
Yeah.
But yeah, for shooting boards, something quick or animating boards, no, there's no reason to do that.
That's why with the program like Storyboard Pro, it's already kind of set up that way. It's like you only draw the background once, and you can even like move the background, move the camera in and out, and do all sorts of crazy things with it. I think that's going to really change up how I move forward, because you can export that stuff out as singles or even on a template.
Sure.
The director could look at it and even make notations on and stuff like that. But yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense to kind of break up all that stuff, because I can't tell you how many times where I've like, oh shit, I flattened this whole freaking thing, dude. And it's like, oh, late nights. No,
Yeah.
No.
don't do what I do.
Yeah. What is your relationship like working with directors? What are you looking for in a director to help you out? And what does the director usually ask from you? What do you think the director is asking you to provide to them?
Well, most of these productions, the director's doing a lot of work, and I think they appreciate someone who comes in with solid ideas and solid options that kind of align with. I mean, there's only so many ways that you can shoot certain things. I think directors appreciate the more they feel that they can trust you to kind of come up with really interesting ideas, or just cover the basic ideas. I think that's where your value is at. Um, they don't. I don't. I have worked with like directors that are very specific. Like they'll give you like an overhead shot of where the camera's going to be, and like what the camera is doing, you know. But then they kind of leave it up to you to figure out, is this a cowboy? Is this a close up? And that's being informed by the script, you know. Um, do we punch in on this emotional line reading? Do we go wide? So every director is different, and even within that director, the scene kind of dictates the approach of how they want to cover it.
Mm-hmm. Sure. No, there's always a time constraint to our jobs, right? Like
Yeah.
it's always, get it done as fast as you can. And what people I think don't realize about the storyboarding process is what you're explaining is you're breaking the shots down in your head. So there's that entire process that you have to go through before you even put pencil to paper. You have to think about the scene. And you can't just think shot by shot, like in an order. You have to think in advance because, I mean, so many times I've trapped myself where I've set something up early and not thought the scene and the entire scene through. And I realized like I've put the camera in the wrong position to start off with. And now I'm like painting myself into a corner and I've got to get out of it.
Hmm.
So, how do you manage the time that you spend actually breaking down a scene and knowing that you have to produce all these drawings by the end of the day as well?
I mean, it's just a series of passes, like I get the gig, I get my section, and then I'll read the section initially and I'll jot down ideas that are coming to my head. Sometimes I'll get like enough leeway before I actually put pencil to paper where they're like, this is the director. And then I'll go do some research and try to get an idea of their style and try to incorporate what the director's style, things things that they like to do within the scene. Some people are straight on, some people are like, okay, yeah, we can be looking down. Some people are like, no, we never look down.
Mm-hmm.
We never go too extreme. We're tracking with this character, or no, we're not tracking. You could find that out sometimes before you start doing some stuff. But I don't know if this is just me and me kind of like falling back on my own frustration of wanting to be a director, writer, director, but I have my own ideas, you know, and if you're hiring me, you're not just hiring a wrist, you're hiring somebody who's reading it and seeing it, and you could either agree with me or not. Um, and there are a lot of different factors of why you could agree or not agree. Like, so for instance, they're like, no, we're not going to have the budget for, this crane, so we got to keep it, straight on, or we won't have the time to do stuff like that, but that's
There's
figured
so
out.
many setups.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But
Mm-hmm.
that's figured
Yeah.
out afterwards. They'll see what I can come up with and see if they can work with it and see if it works within the budget of what and the time and all that stuff. And then the adjustment comes, and then from there it's just a matter of just listening to the director, you know, and giving them what they need, what they want, what they're looking for.
Okay. So two things just to clarify. you much prefer having free reign to break down a script as opposed to being handed a shot list or thumbnails, that sort of thing.
It depends. I mean, it depends on how much time you have. If we only have like a couple days on this thing, then by all means, give me a shot list because this will save time on revisions. Because I'll go off. I have my own visual language. But if you have very strong ideas of how you want to cover this shot, then just write it out.
Okay. And then this goes back to when you mentioned revisions. How do you handle revisions? Let's say you've taken the time to really break down a scene and you felt like you've given it your best effort, and then the director comes back and tells you maybe not, they're not budget reasons, they're just aesthetic reasons that the director wants you to change things. How do you handle that? It's not really criticism, it's just feedback. And this maybe goes back to like being easy to work with.
Yeah, I don't take it personally, because at the end of the day, I'm work made for hire. My revisions, it's just my take, and the revisions that are coming down the line is what you want and what you need. I don't take it personally at all. I am. This is a job. That's why I like my comic book stuff is my art. I don't take notes on my art. You know, you may have your opinion about the way that I told my story, and that's fine. And I hate you
Sure.
for it, if it's negative. But if I do a take on a scene and the director's like, this is crap, I'm like, okay, well, what do you need? Tell me, we could have avoided this crap if you would have given me a solid shot list, and the reason why
Sure.
you didn't give me a shot list is because you're being pulled every way,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
way it's loose,
Sure.
so, I mean,
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
be, go ahead.
Yeah. They have a lot of bases they have to cover during a production,
Yeah.
for sure.
But don't
Yeah.
blame me. I'm trying to
Right.
I'm trying to, I'm here to help.
I wanted to go back to the film thing a little bit there. I read that you had done some previs on the creator. Is
Yeah.
that right? So, can you explain to the audience, like, what does previs mean for storyboarding?
Right. So one day, I mean, I check my junk mail multiple times throughout the day. So one day I see this email in there, Gareth Edwards. I'm like, what? And I click onto it. He goes, hi, my name is Gareth Edwards. I directed Godzilla and Rogue One. I'm a big fan of your work, comic book stuff, right? He goes, I'm working on this new thing and I could use some help on the third act. Would you be interested? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely.
Hell yeah.
So we got together, and he explained to me what the process of what they were going to do. It was going to be like Monsters, like the way that they did Monsters. They were going to do these CGI applications in post, um, and they were going to use the same idea with people. They're going to do these robots and apply them on live action, on actual actors. But there's this whole sequence at the end. I don't know if you've seen it. That takes place in space, and he needed to have some stuff that would represent that portion of the production. And the story he told me, he goes, I normally work with one storyboard guy in all of my things, one main dude when it came to pre-visualization, which is getting images down to either pitch a scene or to pitch a project, something that producers can look at and get a better idea beyond being able to read it. People are very visual. They respond to visuals more than they
Right.
would the written word, He goes, but that guy's busy. So I started looking around, he's got access to all those ILM dudes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And
totally. Garrett's background is in visual effects.
yes.
And then, yeah, that's why he was able to do this at a much lower budget than most people.
Plus, there were a lot of bro deals in what he was doing, but he definitely knows what he showed. He's an operator too. He's a camera operator. So he's
Okay.
he's he's doing what we do, but he's using the camera, you know. Um, so he goes, I have access to all these guys, but they weren't giving me what I needed. So I realized that my original guy, who was doing his own movie, uh,
Hmm.
he had experience in comic books. So I realized I needed a comic book guy, someone who has experience in doing comics. So I went down to a couple comic book stores and I came home with a stack of comics, like 80 comics. As I whittled that down to 40, I took that 40 and I whittled that down to 20, and I took that 20 and I whittled that down to one. And at the end of that process, your book was the warning,
Oh,
you know.
nice.
And I was just sort of sitting there thinking, dude, I could just walk into the traffic right now. I mean, this is, I mean, because I like Gareth Edwards' work for a long time, you know.
Wow. Yeah.
So we sat down, we had a meeting. He has I don't know if he's still there, but he had a nice place overlooking Lake Hollywood. And we just kind of spitballed, some ideas, some key frames that he could take into Regency along with the script. And, they want to be in the Gareth Edwards business, along with his deck. He had a pitch deck as well, but he needed this sequence that was going to take place in the volume kind of fleshed out. And then, that was that process.
Well, just to clarify, because when some people hear the word pre-visualization, they think animation. There are actually some companies that, or pre-viz is it's shortened to normally. They're like 3D companies that do pre-viz work. It's the same for the same purpose, essentially. They might be pitching a project, or they're just trying to figure out a very, very complex scene ahead of time. So
Yeah.
it makes it easier when it comes time to shooting. So is that word kind of interchangeable between storyboard pitch? I would probably call them pitch boards if I were saying that. Or do you disagree? Is it actually pre-visualization, which is a hard word for me to say,
I
obviously?
would say, I understood what you were saying.
Okay, thanks.
I would say that previs is the umbrella, and there are different suites that are
Mhm.
part of that. Like, so for instance, third floor, uh, third floor will do like an animatic or a videomatic that's a little bit more detailed, that takes into account blocking and camera moves and stuff like that. That would go to like a special effects house. Um, and sometimes they'll have sound effects and uh, actors, acting it out, um, and where that stuff ends up, it really depends on what's happening in the production. Sometimes there's a producer, they're like, do we really need to blow up this Death Star thing? I mean, that feels like a lot of money. And then, someone has to say, well, this is what it would look like, and then he's like, oh, okay, got it. You know, sometimes you need to convince someone like that along the way, a
Sure.
studio to open up the purse strings to say, hey, the reason why we need King Kong to jump from this building to that building, is because it'll look cool as hell, you know. But it's all under the same umbrella of production before actual production, you know, and it saves a lot of money. If you can see it before you see it, um, it saves the production from having to, sit down, you see it, and you're like, this isn't
Yeah.
working. Now we got to do reshoots. Now we got to do
Yeah.
all this other stuff.
Yeah. Some people think that storyboard artists are overpaid for what they do because you're just drawing all day. That's all you're doing. No, what you're doing is exactly what you said. You're saving this company millions of dollars in advance and headaches ahead of time, and that's priceless. So
Yep.
I always get upset when I hear, oh, you're just drawing all day. That's it. It's like there's no thinking process involved either. It's just, you're just sketching doodles or something like that. You're not actually doing any processing in your head. It's just all external.
Who are these people? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
who,
But
those people aren't in movies. Those people are Philistines, dude. I mean, they're like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, you know, I hate having that conversation with people that know better. You know, um,
no, for sure.
I was brought on. I don't want to say what project, but they reached out to me last year for reshoots, and they were like, "Yeah, we want to check your availability for the next couple of weeks. We need to do some reshoots. This thing's not working." And I'm like, "Yeah, totally." They're like, "Okay, we're gonna set up a meeting in the next couple of days, uh, and We'll just roll into it." I'm like, "Perfect, perfect," because last year was brutal for work. I mean, for me, there wasn't that much. Um, And so a couple days go by, and then I get an email. They're like, "Yeah, word came on down from the studio that there's no budget for boards."
Hmm.
Whoa.
So,
Yep.
yeah. And I'm like,
Good
"Nope."
luck.
Yeah,
Sweet.
exactly. That's what I always want to say. Good luck with your shoot. Then you guys are going to end up spending more money than you would have spent paying me to do it.
Ridiculous.
And it seems so logical.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's such an important and integral part of the process that cannot be skipped unless you have an absolute genius director. But even in that sense, it's a communication tool as well, right? Like you're expressing to everyone on the crew what is in the director's head, which is sometimes impossible to get. So it's a way of communicating to everyone at the same time what needs to be done, and that saves an invaluable amount of time in the process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you can have all your arguments on the page instead of, when you get footage back.
I was curious, what does the next 10 years look like for you? Do you have an outlook as far as like what the future holds in terms of doing what you do in storyboards or in comics, or pursuing something else altogether?
It seems to me that the future of being able to monetize my creativity lies on the opposite side of the line. Work made for hire has gotten me to this place, but it's obvious uh, that those days may be behind us. Um, Maybe not in your day rate, but the amount of days that you're able to kind of string together. I've actually lost jobs to AI this year. Um, and it's trippy to me because the thing is not even perfected yet, but the ask has been modified down, you know. So
Right.
you'll get less notes, I think, in the future from a director that's like, "You know what? Great sequence, but how about we lower the camera, see what that looks like." It'll be more like, do we really need to see that? We'll do it on the day. And what that means is just basically less work is gonna be available, because the ask is gonna be modified, you know, to because the benefit of not paying me my rate, um, is gonna be greater than, than paying me to give you what you want, what you need, you know? And, I can see the writing on the wall. I see these companies are they cannot wait to not have to pay me what you need to pay me. They just can't. The thing is not even doing I could see the potential. It's there. It's in the 90 percentile. It's close. That's enough. That is enough to cut me out or cut my days.
Right.
And so for me, uh, I'm investing more time in being on the opposite on the other line on the other side of that line that they think that is sort of like that can't be replaced. So IP creation and ownership, EP status, residuals, and also because of age, but it may not even matter because you just get to a place where you're just like, dude, you know, I don't know if I want to work 12 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We are all getting there
Yeah.
at some point.
Yeah. So Ed, this kind of ties into our last question with the rise of AI technology and so forth, and what exactly you just discussed, how difficult it is even for us as seasoned veterans to continue to get work. If a young boy or girl or even in their teens, who's been drawing all their life and they had aspirations of getting into doing storyboards or animation, that sort of thing, and all of a sudden now there's this big hurdle to jump over with AI. Is there any kind of advice that you can give them? It's a tough
Oh,
question.
I really feel that we may be the last generation of people that are getting paid the rate that we're getting paid for these jobs. With this whole AI situation, I sit there and I think, we're fortunate because of the things that inspired us.
Mm-hmm.
We understand story in a way that a young person does not understand because they're being fed off of derivative um, properties, not the foundation stones. Like we were there when Star Wars, like no, before Star Wars, there was a time before Star Wars, and there was a time after Star Wars, and they're
Mm-hmm.
multi generations after Star Wars. You know,
Yep.
so not
Yep.
only is our design language being informed by this sort of proto experience, but our work ethic and the reason why I bring up work ethic because a friend
Mm-hmm.
of mine sent me this quote, Michael Bay quote. He says something like, "AI is imitation that is for lazy people, and it's going to create lazy people, and this is so true, you know, because if you could sit there and go, Superman flies over Metropolis." And then you're like, okay, no, no, I guess this is close enough. That's just like,
Mm-hmm.
that's an alien world, you know, and I think we're going to benefit from having to sit there and like do your perspective, do your anatomy, figure out, uh, composition and developing your own style. That's where we're headed. It'll be less work and you won't be able to make a living, especially if you're living in Los Angeles. Um, it's not just going to be art that gets hit like that.
Mm-hmm.
There are copywriters who are dealing with that. There are actors and voice acting. It's going to hit. This is basically an anti-labor movement that these corporations and these companies, that's where they see the increase in their margins. They're like, hey, we'll get one person to do the job of five people. There are people out there who think like, oh, just pull up your big boy pants and learn a trade. Go do plumbing, go do this, and it's like you don't understand the amount of people that are going to be underemployed or underworked. They're going to they're going to all do the same thing. They're going to try to become plumbers, and the money that plumbers make is going to reduce because there's going to be way more many plumbers. You know, um, these are existential labor questions that I don't have the answers for, and we're hurtling, towards this unknown future. Like when I first saw my first AI generated image, this was like 2 years ago, I was like, huh, okay. Well, maybe, yeah, I'm thinking maybe in 5 years, this will be a problem. And then 4 months after that, I was like, this is a problem now.
It is. It unfortunately is. Ed, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today to speak with us. We really enjoyed getting to just chat with. I was going to call it an interview, but it's more like a conversation. We really appreciate you being here.
Cheers. Thank you. Thank you. That was a great conversation. And it was great to,
Yeah.
just sort of chew the fat, you and
Yeah,
Shane.
absolutely. So if people don't know that much about you and they want to find out more, where could you send them to?
edlaroche.com, ed_Laroche on Insta. It's where I post a lot of my work.
Fantastic. All right. That about wraps it up. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.